All right, so we are filming the very first episode of the Veracity podcast, and we're just going to go over a few things today. This is kind of a little bit of a test run, and making sure all my equipment's kind of working, making sure that everything I'm doing is going to work out in the way I want it to, and we're gonna kind of use this day as a way to work out some bugs and figure out the best way I can have a good setup and just kind of get used to my stuff. But we're also going to go over where this podcast came from, why it started, and what I'm looking forward to doing with this in the future and where it's going to go. So this is definitely a bit new for me. I come from a background I've grown up, loved doing videos and stuff like that. So this is a little bit different than making videos, although I will be recording this stuff and putting it on YouTube as well. Um, it's just a little bit different than filming on the audio side of the world. So it's a bit of a learning curve for me. But, anyways, let's get started today. So, first off, my name is Waylon Pitts. I grew up, like I said, making videos, putting them on YouTube. I still do that to this day. We own a YouTube channel. Me and my brother run it. It's called a Vanatics, which is like another word meaning hunter. And we run that over on YouTube. If you guys want to go check it out, it's awesome. Awesome channel. We put a lot of work into it. Been a little bit dormant for the past few months. We've been kind of busy, but we're trying to jump back in it. And we usually thrive in our deer season. We do a lot of hunting stuff on there. So deer season should, which is a few months away, we should pick up things and really jump back on there and get rolling a little bit. All right, I had to pause real quick because forgot my timer. Like I said, this is a bit of a learning curve, so we're gonna figure this thing out together. But first off, I want to start off by giving a description of what the name means and what this is about, what this podcast is focusing towards, and just kind of give you guys a little bit of a foundation of what we're doing here. So I wrote this down a little while back, and I'm just gonna kind of read it off, and so you guys can get a kind of an idea of what we're doing here and the idea moving forward. So I feel like my mic's a little hot. Let me back that off for a second. All right. So this podcast is based on the interviewing of friends and family on the topic of God, life, and the pursuit of truth. Its foundation is the belief that through dialogue we can discover the truths of the world as well as the truths of our Father. Veracity, conformity to facts, or accuracy, which leads us to our name of a podcast, The Pursuit of Veracity. Like I said, veracity is conformity to facts, or also meaning accuracy. And it's almost like a different way to say truth, right? And for a while, I've been kind of, I don't want to say obsessed with the idea, but I've definitely loved the idea of pursuing truth. And I maybe that's because like in today's society, we don't really see that a whole lot. We don't see a whole lot of people who love and want, there's a big word right there, want to find truth and to find that just not just a truth that they want to hear, but a truth that they want to see. And so when I was wanting to start a podcast, we're going to do a hunting podcast as well for fanatics, but I didn't just want to do a hunting podcast. There's plenty of those. And there's even plenty of podcast about, truth and stuff like that, I'm sure, out there somewhere. But when I really got to thinking about this, and I was like, I want to do a podcast that sole focuses on truth, because in my personal opinion, and I was thinking about this on the ride over here to record this morning. In my opinion, when you pursue truth, it always leads back to one thing, and this is where many people could have dialogue on this and talk about it. But to me, every time I was focused on truth, I got led back to one thing, and that being God. Like there wasn't a time in my life where I pursued truth and where I pursued, and I didn't care about my own gain from it. I wasn't pursuing truth that I might climb up a hill or stand on top of a mountain from it. But I was pursuing truth because I wanted to find the truth of life, right? I wanted to find what, like, it might sound a little cliche, but like why we're here, why am I here, like these type of things. So when I started asking these questions, I started pursuing truth. it always led me back to God. And I found that to be very interesting when I start to pursue truth and I start to pursue truth in its wholeness. I always got led back to the same thing, and that would be God in Christ, you know. And so I always found that very interesting. And so leading back, kind of backing up a little bit to where we are now, I feel like through this podcast, even if I have people, and this is just a theory, but even if I have people that may not believe in Christ or believe in the things that he did, um, I just get a feeling that it'll always come back to him. You know, I I get the feeling that it's kind of hard for it not to. You know, so basically, that's the name, man. Pursuit of veracity, and veracity just means accuracy, it just means truth, and that's what we're out here to do. So, it's podcast number one, day number one, and we're looking forward to seeing this thing jump off. I'm looking to probably get in contact with some guys in next week. Probably gonna have my first guest. That is a big thing I want to do. Is mainly focused on interviewing guests, whether that be friends, whether that be family, whether it be a total stranger I don't even know. Like I'm not really too picky on it, but I know a few people already that I'm very interested in interviewing and talking to because um, their opinions. One thing I've noticed, you know, I've been a Christian for a few years, probably. I've called myself a Christian my whole life, but I've probably actually been one for I don't know a few years, I would say. And it's not that I have a lot of salvation or whatever, but I was just wasn't dedicated, you know. So, but anyways, been one for a few years, and I know I was going somewhere with this. Been one for a few years, and I've noticed in the kingdom that people, even in the kingdom, still have very interesting viewpoints and different viewpoints. We don't all carry the same viewpoint and visual on how things operate. As obviously, I think in the kingdom we have different gifts and we have different callings, you know, and different purposes, you know, to work as a whole in the body. But so I've noticed that what I see and what I might perceive can be different than what another brother or sister perceives or sees. So I think through the interviewing of people who believe, you're gonna come across viewpoints where you're like, whoa, I didn't really notice that, or I didn't see that, and I think that's important. I've noticed when I talk to people, and it's on the topic of God, or it might even not even be on that topic. It could be on a different topic or something like that. But it always comes to kind of a point where I'm like, I haven't really thought of that before, or maybe I say something like, "Well, I've never thought of that before." It's funny how when you just talk to people and you just have dialogue, that all of a sudden, like you're you're learning, like, and even if these people aren't the smartest people in the world, I definitely don't think I don't think I'm the smartest guy in the world. But when I start talking, you know, and I start speaking to people, we start learning, you know, and I think that's the power. One, that's probably why podcasts are so popular. And even in a generation where we really have a very short attention span, podcasts are still pretty popular, and it's quite amazing to watch. And I think that's because people love learning, and through talking, we learn a lot. So it's kind of my theory on it. But even in the kingdom, as I was back to what I was saying, even in the kingdom, just us opening our mouths and talking to one another, we get to see different viewpoints. We get to see how different things operate, and we get to learn. And that's a pretty big thing, and a thing I think is super important. So I'm gonna have a lot of friends on here, gonna have a lot of family on here, and we're just gonna pursue truth, pursue accuracy, and see what we find and uncover. As for topics are gonna vary. Topics are gonna vary. I'm gonna usually with the person I choose to be on here, I'm gonna have a reason. I'm gonna already have a topic kind of picked out, uh, and we're gonna work with that. Um, I'll probably sit down and just go ahead and make a few note points. But I do want open conversation. I don't want a narrow, closed box. So even though I might have a list, like I have a list today of some things I was going to talk on, but even when I have a list, I'm not gonna not really necessarily gonna just stick to that. It's gonna be an open conversation. It's gonna be kind of a free flowing conversations. That's the goal, anyways. And from a perspective of being an interviewer, I guess that's probably gonna be a curveball for me, is trying to be ask the right questions and then leave the door open for answers and not to be so closed minded, which I think is a good thing I'm gonna learn out of this. Is how to be open, how to be open minded, and not just so fixated on my viewpoints or something like that. Because I mean, truly, I want to learn so much from this. And I think the reason this is kind of a place in my heart to do this is because I really do I want to learn a lot more. And I want to learn. I mean, I'm one of those people, man. I just love people. I love God. I love people. That's kind of my thing. That's something I've really, really love, and something I really realized about myself recently. And so talking to people, man, is gonna be awesome. I love learning, love hearing people's different viewpoints, and it's gonna be amazing, man. I'm excited for it. Excited for it. But it's kind of a little background. I think I've kind of hit everything. I'm trying to make sure that I'm not missing anything, but definitely don't want the podcast to start off vague and for people not really know what's going on. So, but for a topic today, sometimes I'll do these where I'm just kind of by myself, because there's some topics that I just kind of might want to discuss and put out there, and maybe get some feedback later on, or see what happens with it. But obviously, some people, people got plans, they got their own lives. Maybe you're not able to talk to them all the time or see them all the time, or so we're not always going to be able to have guests on the show. But I'm gonna sometimes fill in, just being myself and getting on here and talking away like I'm doing today. Because man, I can get long-winded sometimes. I can just ramble on and on. Got a little bit of a preacher's blood in me, I guess. So I kind of feel as if I could just ramble on and on and on. So, but today we're just gonna kind of discuss truth in its wholeness. Um, when I was young, I had this idea. I was like, when I had an encounter. First off, I had an encounter with God at a service one night, and just a feeling of the Holy Spirit. I'm not talking about a physical encounter, but um, I definitely realized that this was something that was real and not just a one of those things that people make up in their head to make them feel good. And realized at a really young age. But as I grew, I didn't. I was like, this is cool and all, this God, he's cool, but I kind of want to do my own thing. I kind of want to, live my own life, you know, air quotations to that. Live my own life, and then, we'll see about God down the road. And as I got older, I just kind of I ended up coming to a church, which is actually where we're on set is the church I actually came to. I ended up coming here for a camp, and man, I got a really good taste of who Christ was, and it totally changed my perspective on it. The perspective I had been taught through a different church and different people. It wasn't that it was a bad one, but I think it was missing some truths. It was missing some things in its wholeness, and not that these people are bad people or anything. They're great people and full of love. But I think maybe my perspective and just needed to be changed a little bit. So coming here really helped open my eyes up. And so at a young age, I really didn't care a whole lot about Christ. But then about 13 or 14, which is still pretty young, but I had my encounter was probably when I was 8 or 9. But when I was about 13 or 14, I ended up coming to this camp, or maybe even younger than that. Maybe I was 11 or 12. Um, Ended up coming to this camp, and it was just life changing, and um, scared me at first. Didn't really like it a whole lot. They really push leadership here, and they really push you out of your comfort zone. And at first, I didn't like that because I thought I was just I was a really quiet kid, and I was homeschooled, so that wasn't helping my quietness none. And I was like, man, I'm just a quiet person. That's just who I am. Like I'm just a quiet guy. And some people still consider me a pretty quiet person. I wouldn't say I'm the loudest in the room by no means, but I'm not really quiet anymore, and that's because of years of these guys pushing me and you know building me up to be more of a leader instead of just a follower. And I think that's kind of why we're here today is doing a podcast like this is because of that kind of mindset. But back to the story. Um, yeah, I kind of had even more encounters at this camp and ended up coming back to the camp next year and started going to the youth and on. Really started to present a question in my mind. It's like, okay, like this Jesus, like this is real. This is like I started seeing the evidence. I started seeing like things were adding up. I didn't just believe because my parents told me God existed. I thought that wasn't enough for me, not in particular. Um, and I really started to question things and like ask questions more and just by myself. It wasn't like I was asking a whole lot of people things. I would occasionally, but for the most part, it was really just kind of me figuring things out. And man, just started asking questions and seeking it out. And then I started. I've had some pretty interesting encounters, just by myself, with God, and very interesting things that have happened. And not that some people get focused on trying to find physical things to prove God or physical encounters. Those are cool, and it's just yeah, I don't think it's something you can focus on all the time. But I've had those, and even after having those, it was still, my doubts could still come and go, but they definitely helped kind of seal the deal on my thoughts of who God is and if He existed really. And so that's kind of a little bit of a backstory. As I got older, um, I would get really on fire for God, and then I would kind of back off a little bit, and then I'd get really on fire again. And it was usually when camp rolled around, man. I'd go to camp and I'd just get lit up, dude. I would just be on fire, man, and just so like ready to go. But when I got home, it kind of would always die off. It would always kind of like just fade away. And I would always, man, I'd always wonder, I'd be like, why? Why does this happen? Like every single time I go to this camp, man, I just get lit up. I'm on fire. I just feel ready to go, man. I'm ready to take on everything. And I think something I kind of learned over the years is it was really kind of my fault, but I think it was because I didn't really, I didn't really let people disciple me a whole lot, besides on like Friday nights when I'd go to youth or something like that. So I didn't really buy into discipleship a whole lot. And two, I wasn't really consistent with my alone time with God or, what we call house one, house one's you and him. I really didn't have that a whole lot in order. And it's kind of hard to have that in order when you don't really have a whole lot of accountability or you don't allow accountability is what I should say, because honestly that's kind of where I was, right? It just I wouldn't really allow it, because when you establish a church family, you have the opportunity to allow discipleship in your life. You have the opportunity to allow people to teach you and take you under their wing. And I just don't think I allowed that a whole lot. I think I knew that if I did that, that would cost me some things that my flesh really liked. So I kind of stayed away from that. I knew there was some things I was doing that weren't really lining up with who God is or what He wants from me. And I was like, I don't really. I think deep down I was like, I don't really want to get rid of these things, so I'm just gonna kind of like we're gonna play Christian a little bit, right? Which is what a lot of people do. A lot of people, they play Christian and I'm not bashing anybody who does that. I think I've done it for most of the years I've been alive. That's for sure. But man, there's so much more. There's so much more to who God is and what He wants for us. And I think when you're when you're playing Christian, you think you're doing what's best for you, right? You think you're like man, I've got this figured out. Like I've got this plan and I've got this plan, and then when those plans don't turn out, then you're like, oh, yeah, maybe I don't have everything in my hands the way I thought I did. But so I did that for a while, and hit rock bottom a few times, and got to a place where I was like, I really, really, really just want to be his. And I really want to live truth. I don't really want to be fake. I don't want to be a fake Christian. I don't want to be another person, another warm body in a church building or in a building. This church is a people, it's not really a place. I didn't want to just be another warm body in a building, and for people to be like, man, that guy is like a hypocrite, you know? And of course, you know, you're going to mess up, you're going to fall down, but there's a difference between falling down every now and again and then falling down all the time, because you're allowing that. You're allowing your flesh to have control. You're allowing these things into your life. And there was a lot of stuff I allowed in my life where I was like, man, I'm just going to keep this here because this makes me feel comfortable when I get stressed out, or this makes me feel comfortable when I'm, you know, a little worrisome or whatever, you know. And I was like, I'm just going to keep these things here because these few things are like, they feel good to the flesh. And man, they're always there when I need it. Like, it's good for me, right? And something to understand is like, not everything that appeases your flesh is good for you. Honestly, probably like 90% of the things that feels good to the flesh is probably not good for you. And the problem with pleasing your flesh is that it becomes only about what you want and doesn't become about anything else. And when you're called to Christ, you're called to pick up your cross and die to yourself, right? Dying to yourself is letting go of your fleshly desires and everything that you want. It's not a it's a beautiful thing, but it's not a fun thing to do. It's not a fun thing to die to yourself. It's not a fun thing to let go of your flesh, because your flesh always wants, and your flesh always wants more. But when you're called to Christ, you're called to let all that go. And that's truly because he's got a way better plan for you than you think. Now that plan might call you out of the desert. That plan might that plan might call you to a place where you don't really understand why you're there, or you don't understand why that's happening, but it might very well be necessary. I'd argue as soon as you come to Christ, you usually kind of hit what you feel as a sort of low point, you know, little ways afterwards. And I think a lot of people are like, "Man, God, where'd you go?" And a lot of times, I think that's just God working, man. He's putting you in a place where you become stronger, right? A lot of times we think, or sometimes we'll pray like, "God, make me stronger." And you know, I'm sure a lot of people have heard this, and I think it's very true. Is, you know, God, if you pray that kind of a prayer, right, you're not gonna get a you're not just gonna get strength, right? You're gonna get an opportunity to become stronger. And I think that's beautifully said. I've heard it said before, and I think that's perfect. I think that kind of adds up with everything that I've seen in my life. You know, anytime I needed peace, or anytime I needed like stuff like that, I just had opportunities to gain that, and it was really my choice, right? I don't think God's gonna force feed us, right? I think He's gonna give us opportunities to gain what we ask, um, if what we ask is good for us, right? Sometimes the things that we ask aren't good for us, and the only reason we're asking for is to appease our flesh. And if that's the case, you know, God's not going to feed you something that's just going to appease your flesh, right? He's going to give you something that's good, that's solid to chew on, right? Something that's good for you. So, went on a little bit of a tangent there, but like you said, that's kind of what happens when you're pursuing truth, though, I guess. But yeah, so I eventually came to a point where man, I just wanted Christ and all who he is. So I've really been pursuing him pretty hard, and just allowing him to have everything in my life and just who I am. You know, I just want who I am to be a reflection of who he is, right? Um, and that's an interesting journey to get to this point. a lot of learning, and I'm young, man. I'm only 20, so I've got quite a lot to learn, quite a lot to do. But it's been an interesting ride to get to the even to this point where we're at now, and it's been amazing. It's really cool. Kind of reflecting on it, kind of talking about it right now. It's like you're kind of seeing how things built up, right? You know, kind of how things are put into place and how they affect the outcome of your life and who you become. And I think it's cool that I'm making this choice at a young age to really just let go and let God. You know, you've heard that kind of saying before, and just let Him have control, man. I really learned this. We just had camp not too long ago. I think it was like 2 weeks ago now. I think it was like, yeah, maybe about 2 weeks ago. We had camp, man, and it was an amazing one. It always is every year when you get a bunch of kids together that they just want Christ, man. It's amazing. But one of the things I was really learning is just being, you know, just allowing yourself to just be His, you know, and just surrender. One of the big things was surrender. You know, I think a lot of times we try to take things in our own hands, or even try to fight a battle that's already been won, when really we're just called to surrender. And I think that's just beautiful, man. So surrendering and learning how to surrender and not try to fight the whole time. Because a lot of times we're fighting and we're fighting against His will, but we think it's the enemy, and we can get confused about that. Learning how to surrender has been an interesting thing but I've loved it. I've truly loved it. Because I mean, you realize how much God really loves you when you start to surrender. You realize a lot about how much you were trying to control things and how much you had like things in like this little ball, and you're like, oh, I got it, I got it. And when you surrender, you like let go of all that, and it's just, man, you pick up what's Him, you pick up Him, and it's an absolute beautiful thing. But yeah, I've been doing that for a little while now. Highly recommend it, man. Highly recommend it. Highly recommend that you just pursue Christ with all your heart, because what you have and what you have to offer is not, it'll leave you wanting more, and it'll leave you questioning, and it'll leave you wondering, and it'll leave you asking. But picking up what is His, which is Him, and letting Him have control, that's when fulfillment starts happening. That's when you start actually feel like, man, I don't feel like half the person I should be anymore. I actually feel like I'm doing something. So it's a pretty cool story, man. I love it a lot. And it's just at the beginning. It's just at the beginning. That's what's pretty cool about it. But kind of wanted to reflect on something, because I just realized that I gave a description of where this podcast kind of came from, and there's a little bit more deeper meaning to it, and I forgot to mention. Um, I had a few friends that I worked with. My first job was at we'll just say it's not really a local, but a feed and seed company, kind of self feed for animals and stuff like that. And I had a few friends. We had you'll probably see them on the podcast, so I'll just name their first names. I had Andrew, I had Brawlin, and I had Spencer. These were kind of my few friends. They kind of came on. Andrew was there when I got there. Brawlin came shortly after I had gotten there, and then Spencer came along shortly after that. So we had this group of us, four guys, who all still hang out to this day, and we would do freight, and through that, you know, we would do um, as we were unloading these boxes and stocking shelves, we would just talk, man, and we would get on these crazy, I mean, just crazy topics of just like really good deep stuff, and we would just talk about it all the time, and we would just pursue. I mean, for me, I was just pursuing truth, man, and through these dialogue we were having, man, they would point out things, and I'd be like, "Whoa, like that is really good," and I would just grasp onto that and like, do with it what I would, and we would just do this. I mean, it was like an everyday thing. We would just talk and talk, and we just there wasn't. I mean, yeah, we had fun. Sometimes our conversations were just dumb and and just random conversations about random things. But then we always seemed to like to find time to have a meaningful conversation about something. And man, that was really what really lit the spark for me to start a podcast, was talking to those guys, man. Because we would just get on some topics, and a lot of times, me being a Christian, I always love to center around God, and so a lot of times it was centered around that, and it was interesting to see people's viewpoints on it, even if they believed or didn't. And I think that's just like so cool. It was just so cool. So those guys, shout out to you guys. Those guys were awesome, man, and they really. I told them, I was like, guys, I'm gonna start a podcast one day. Like I've got to do this, and they're like, dude, you need to do it. Like it would be awesome. So they've kind of gave me the inspiration to do it. But it's funny, you know, being on the topic of truth. You don't have to be in a podcast setting to pursue that, right? You don't have to be in a place of microphone in your face, you know, to find that. Like we were doing that at work all the time, you know. We are always trying to figure out something, we're just in there unboxing stuff. It's not like we're making something for the whole world to see. We're just being, right? And that's what's cool is I think, and this is just kind of an idea that just kind of hit me. Maybe pursuing truth isn't really. I'm trying to think of how to describe this. Maybe pursuing truth isn't really something you really have to dig for, but just something you got to be open to. And what I mean by that is like if you're really open with yourself and you open yourself up to conversations, even conversations that make you feel uncomfortable, it's hard not to. When you open yourself up, it's hard not to learn something. It's hard not to find a truth. It's hard not to find an answer to whatever. So even talking to people that you might disagree with, and those guys, man, we're all kind of like minded. I don't think we have our different viewpoints, and that's for certain. But for the most part, I think we're all pretty like minded. But even opening yourself up to people you don't really agree with, and just hearing what they have to say is kind of important. And we hear people. I think people as a whole kind of feel like, oh yeah, I'd listen to somebody I disagree with, and some people definitely are. We see that a lot. We see a lot of people who just are definitely like, no, I won't talk to that person because I'll use the obvious example, like I won't talk to that person because they're a Republican. I won't talk to that person because they're a Democrat. And it's like, okay, like yeah, I understand, like, but you've already predestined your mindset and you've already allowed yourself to be closed off. I'm not saying you have to tolerate things that are obviously wrong, but maybe, just maybe, if you were open to having a conversation with some people, maybe you could be in the wrong first off. Like there's not 100% definition that you are right just because you think you're right. And two, you might just being who you're supposed to be and being open and honest, you might just change somebody else's mind, right? Like you really could. I think a lot of times you see a lot of protests, right? You see a lot of people go to like certain events and they'll protest against it. Um, like parades and stuff like that. They'll go and protest against it. And I've wondered, Like, okay, you're going with signs and all this stuff against an event with people who obviously could disagree with you, and you have your group and they have their group, and the only thing you're doing, the only type of dialogue you're having is y'all yelling back and forth at each other. And it's like, well, call me crazy, but I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and I'm gonna say that that's not gonna change anybody's mind. How is it going to? You're not building a relationship. You're not you're not really having dialogue. You're just kind of yelling at each other. Um, man, what else? I mean, those are the two big ones. You're not really There's not really a whole lot of substance besides what visually looks like hatred, right? So when you have all these things and there's no real dialogue or anything like that, how are you going to change each other's minds? You're not going to. And maybe that's not the point. Unfortunately, probably not. But I think if you're really wanting to change somebody's mind, you'd sit down and talk with them. If you really cared about these people and, you know, wanted them to change, you would go for the building of a relationship besides the pursuing of you being right. I think that's I think that's something to think about. I think we all think we might pursue truth a little bit, but I think a lot of times we're just pursuing us trying to be right and us having the overall say in something, or the highest standard in our own mind, right? Instead of just pursuing truth in its wholeness. When you pursue truth in its wholeness, you're going to find him because he is truth, right? You're not going to find yourself. You're not full of truth. But through him, he's the one, right? And so that's probably also a big reason why you don't really see a whole lot of change in these protest and counter protests, right? It's because, well, there's not a whole lot of him in it. Probably not a whole lot of him in it at all. So, yeah, it's very interesting to think about. But I think, you know, through sitting down and talking with people, we're going to see a lot of that. We're going to see a lot of open conversations. I have a few people in mind, man. I'm itching to do this with. I'm itching to have the interviews with. Probably going to set up one next week, and don't know really who I'm going to pick yet to do it, but I'm so excited for it. So excited for it, man. Hopefully this all turns out the way I want to. I don't really have a set time for this. We're at about 38 minutes now in today's podcast, but I don't know. I feel like I've almost covered everything I want to cover today. So they're gonna vary. Depends on like who I'm talking to, how deep of a conversation we're having, on how far we go with these. But I think for today, this is a good place to end it. Um, kind of covered on a different few things. We talked about truth and accuracy a little bit, and yeah, I think this is not too bad of a first day, first episode number one. And gonna try to pump these things out, man. Gonna try to do a lot of this stuff. I love to talk, man. As you guys can tell, I'm on one a day. Just kind of been rambling away, and it's just me sitting here. Literally on my notes, I've had the only thing I had wrote down was the podcast description, which I read at the very first beginning and took me about 10 seconds to read. So I've just kind of chomping at the bit the rest of the time. But yeah, guys, appreciate you guys for tuning in to episode one. Um, like I said, next week I'm going to try to have a guest on. We're going to try to have some interesting dialogue and have some conversation and just see what we come up with. Depending on the guest is going to be depending on the topic. And like I said, even though might write down a few topics to go off of, you never know where we might go. Back when it was Andrew and Bralin and me and Spence, and man, we might start on one topic where we end up totally somewhere completely different. So you really don't know what might happen. But thank you guys for tuning in, and we're gonna catch you next time.